It's the All Night Long Wrestling Podcast with the Enforcer.
I believe they call them enforcers, Gordon. I sell women's shoes.
And the Stallion.
Stallion, baby! I'm not what you would call a handsome man. I'll kick you in the nuts and you'll smile at me and like it. All night long.
Welcome to another edition of the All Night Long Wrestling Podcast. We are your host. He is the Stallion. I am the Enforcer, and we are joined by an incredibly special guest. I would like to welcome everybody, Ring of Honor star, the Mr. One Punch, the knockout artist, Shane Taylor. Welcome to the All Night Long Wrestling Podcast, my friend.
Thank you guys for having me, man. Appreciate it. It's an honor.
I appreciate it. Listen, I heard, is there a dog in the background? What kind of dog you got?
I got 2 pit bulls.
That's awesome, man. I grew up with pit bulls. They are my favorite, man. That's awesome. Every time we do an interview with somebody, I got my German Shepherd and my lab barking in the background, so don't worry about that.
Oh, yeah. All right, cool. And my baby just got home, and my wife just got home, so they're all excitable right now. So.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure they're bringing everything to the door, and it's all playtime right now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Everybody knows you from Ring of Honor, but I want to start, growing up, I know, you have a great story that I think people really, an inspiring story in growing up and how you got into the wrestling business. So before we get to Ring of Honor and the awesome last 2 weekends that you've had and your new, should I say, commentating career, let's start from the beginning and just tell us, a little bit about where you came from and what that was like and what led you to the wrestling business.
I'm an Army brat. My dad was a first-class drill sergeant in the Army for like 20 years. My mom was a teacher. So I've literally lived in, 30 states and a few different countries. But we settled in Cleveland, Ohio. And that's where I was born. And when we lived on the east side of Cleveland, Ohio, it was a rough time before the city tried to fix it, and they failed at doing that. But a lot of drugs, a lot of gangs, a lot of violence. It astonishes people when I say that, I'd probably gone to over 100 funerals by the time I was like 15. You know what I mean? So Jeez. As an adult, that sort of numbs you to those things. So I see things differently now, and I know it's because of my background, but just crazy stuff, man. Like just going to the gas station with my cousins, it wasn't a shock to see like a dead body at the gas station. You know what I mean? So yeah. So like then you leave, and it was like a shock to me because I would move other places. I've lived in Pittsburgh and I lived all over the country. I'm in Houston, Texas right now. So like once you leave and you're like, oh, everybody doesn't live like this. Like,
right. It's a different world.
It's a whole different world, but yeah, man, I grew up rough. I remember, we wouldn't be allowed to sit on the couches in my living room, because the drug dealers on the corner would come and shoot up our house because my dad and my uncles would fight them off the corner. So they just didn't deal on our corner. You know what I mean? So that's the background that I came from. It's very, very easy, to become a statistic, very, very easy, to become just another number when you're born into an environment like that. But luckily for me, I had people around me that gave a damn, I had people around me that wanted me to be special and saw the potential that I had. So my dad sat me down one day because I was messing up and I was headed down that path, and he sat me down and said, hey, you've got 2 choices. Either this is going to be the life that you're going to lead, and I'm going to show you how to do it, but there's no, like, this is it. Like, this is just who you're going to be. It's going to be paranoia. It's going to be violence. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. It's going to be jail or death. He's like, or you can be a better man than me and do what I couldn't do, you know? So that's the route that I chose. Was first member of my family to go to college, graduate college. And then, you know, sports all through school, all through college. And then eventually once I left there, you know, I had two choices again, either get a real job or, you know, try pro wrestling, which is something that I've always loved. Grew up watching it. We would all get together and order pay-per-views at different houses, and we would all just gather there as a family and watch, you know, Taker and Vader and Hogan and Flair and just all the names. And I remember when my dad took me to the Richfield Coliseum, which was my very first live show. It was Kerry Von Erich against the Warlord, went to a double countout, and I just remember the building going absolutely bonkers. And people are throwing stuff, they're throwing popcorn, they're throwing drinks, they're throwing everything. And I'm just sitting back as a kid going, whatever they do that makes people they don't know react this way, I want to do. So, I mean, yeah. So, like, with that inspiration, after college, I ended up reconnecting with a buddy of mine, Raymond Rowe, who you guys know is one half of War Raiders, former IWGP Tag Team Champions, former ROH Tag Champions, and another guy by the name of Jerry Myers, a.k.a. J-Rock, who also helped train EC3 and John McChesney and a whole bunch of other people. So once I got with them, you know, the rest is sort of history.
Now, I mean, that's growing up, like you said, you know, so there's two paths, and obviously, you know, you made the right decision. So how does going from, you know, going to the Coliseum and seeing the Warlord and the Texas Tornado, how do you get from there to, I guess, going to a wrestling school? Is that a decision you made? Like, once you were there, you're like, this is it. This is what's for me. This is how I'm, you know, or were there other things you did along the way and you always kind of came back to wrestling?
Yeah, it was more of the latter, because as a kid, like, the only way that I knew was go to Vince. You know what I mean? So I didn't know how to do that as a kid. So, you know, I amateur wrestled in school, played football, you know, and did that all the way through school. And then it wasn't until I think like 2006, 2007, you know, I didn't even know about the indies. You know what I mean? Like, there was a company in Pittsburgh where I was living at the time called the International Wrestling Cartel. And I remember seeing Ray and J-Rock on a poster and remembering Ray Rowe from high school. And I was like, oh, well, let's see what this is, you know? So I went into that and I was hooked. Ever since that, I was like, oh, there's other routes to go other than this one, than the main one. So once I figured that out, that's when I really started to get, you know, refine that passion for it and start looking for my way to get in.
And now, being an athlete through college and in high school, that, you know, the amateur wrestling, like you said, did that make the transition to the training professional wrestling easier, or do you believe the training for professional wrestling is more, you know, as mental as it is physical?
A little bit of both. Anything you do physically or anything you do that's taxing in any sort of way is mostly mental. The physical pain and the exhaustion and all that stuff is going to come and go the more you get used to it. But I do think there are a few sports that carry over to wrestling very well as far as, you know, the mindset you need and the conditioning. You know, amateur wrestling is one of them. It's very similar as far as the groundwork and chain wrestling and moving and always trying to stay one step up ahead. And then boxing as well, which I've done since I was like 5. Just the ability to continue to move and continue to be at your best even when you're tired. You know, all those skills come into play when you cross over from those two sports, which is why you see so many guys now with wrestling backgrounds or fighting backgrounds, because it's a easier learning curve when you step between the ropes.
where did you spend most of where did you start training for pro wrestling?
In Cleveland with Ray Rowe and J Rock.
Okay, and your first match that was in Cleveland as well?
My very first match was, I think, in Paynesville, Ohio, for a company called New Era Pro Wrestling, and I was actually wrestling J Rock. So once they got me under their wing, they sort of just sheltered me from the rest of the BS. You know what I mean? So, and made sure they took care of me. So it was all good.
Yeah, it's always good to have somebody, looking out for you, especially, in this business. Now, preparing for your first match, I know professional wrestling is so much more than, it's not a one-person thing. I mean, you're in there with somebody else. And we had just spoken to Kimberly last week, and I asked her, I said, are you ever really ready for your first professional wrestling match? So I would be interested to hear what you say about that.
No. I mean, but there's a lot of things but that's just like life in general. There's a lot of things you're not ready for until they just happen to you, and then you have to adapt. Like for a long time, like before I had my daughter, I was like, I'm not ready for a kid. I'm not ready. But then she came, and I was like, well, it's time to get ready. Like,
gotta lace them up, right? We have no choice.
Exactly.
Now.
Like you're forced into the situation, so you got to be ready. Or at least give it your best shot. But you never know until you're out there. So there's always going to be nerves. There's always going to be anxiousness. I mean, hell, before every match that I have now, like there's the butterflies are there. Those never go away. If they do, then you're done, because that means that the anxiousness and the passion, all that is gone. Because as well as I want to do, I'm excited to be able to go perform, so those butterflies should always be there.
Absolutely, and I think that shows in your matches because, and speaking freely here, I think in 2018 you are absolutely having the best matches of your career. Now, where I think everybody knows when you came into Ring of Honor, you were one half of what I call the greatest named tag team of all time, and that is the Pretty Boy Killers with Keith Lee. I got to know, we had Keith Lee on the show as well. Who came up with that name?
That name originally is credited to a buddy of mine from Ohio named Trip Lee. He was the Pretty Boy Killer, Trip Lee, and he's just a rugged dude. And I love that name so much. I was like, damn, why didn't I think of that? But then, like, later on down the line, he had taken a break, or, he wasn't wrestling as much. So when I came up with the concept with Keith, we are really just talking about being two guys who look the way we do, who are often overlooked because of that, or sold short because we don't fit the prototype, of what people think professional wrestlers should look like. We were sick of that, and we wanted to show not only could we go out there and outperform them, but just because, but we were going to rub it in the nose of everybody else, who thought that we couldn't. So the name itself is sort of just a big middle finger to that train of thought. So I mean, that's why I chose to go with that.
That's a great name, and to this day, it's my favorite tag team name of all time. When did you meet Keith, and when did you guys start teaming together officially?
Shortly after I got to Texas. I got to Texas maybe like end of 2013. So I want to say probably by like that fall of 2014, I ran into Keith at a independent in like the Houston/Cypress area. And we didn't start teaming for a little bit after that. But we originally started teaming because, again, we both were singles wrestlers who knew that nobody else looked like us or could do the things that we could do. But also because they were looking for a tag team to send over to Pro Wrestling Noah at the time to challenge